Hello and welcome to BEC 6. In this module, we're going to talk about economics. We'll start with microeconomics. We're going to look at the micro picture. We're going to peep into your house. Look at what you're doing. How much do you earn? How many dollars do you spend? What do you buy? Where do you date? And then we're going to move on and talk about macroeconomics. Macro means bigger picture, where we look at the economy as a whole. So in microeconomics, we're talking about individuals and firms. In macroeconomics, we're looking at the economy as a whole. We're talking about economic policy, economic output, employment, inflation, business cycles, international trade. So all that, lots of content to come. So we're starting with microeconomics. And let's look at the demand for pizzas in a neighborhood. So everyone loves pizzas. And we know that if pizzas were at $8, there would be 500 pizzas demanded in that neighborhood every day. But if the price for pizzas increased from $8 to $10, we saw that the quantity demanded came down from 500 to 300. If you increase the price further from $10 to $12, the quantity demanded came down further from 300 to 200 per day. At $14, the quantity demanded was only 100 pizzas per day, and even lesser when the price increased to $16. So we could say that as price increased, the quantity demanded for the pizza decreased. So we could see that there was movement along this demand curve. So as price increased, the quantity demanded decreased. This, my friends, is the law of demand and our starting point as we are all set to champion concepts of microeconomics. We just saw that as prices of pizzas changed, there was a movement along this demand curve. So when prices went up, the quantity demanded decreased. So there was movement along the demand curve. When prices went down, the quantity demanded of pizzas increased and there was a movement along this curve. Now let's say the prices of pizzas didn't change, but instead the prices of hot dogs went up. So what people did was they stopped consuming hot dogs. They started consuming less of hot dogs and more of pizzas. We had people moving from hot dogs to pizzas. And we observed that at each price point, the quantity demanded for pizzas went up. So at $8 for pizzas, the quantity demanded was not 500, it was now 600. Let's say at $10, we now had 400 pizzas being demanded every day. At $12, the demand now increased from 200 to 300. At $14, the new level of demand was 180 pizzas. At $16, it was 100 pizzas. So at each price point, we had a new quantity demanded. And let's join these dots and build up the new demand curve. Wow. So we can now see that the demand curve has moved to the right. And this is a positive shift in the demand curve. So what this means is the quantity demanded at each price point is more than what we had earlier. So let's put it here. Positive shift. Basically, the demand curve has moved to the right. So we saw that as the price of substitute, so guys, hot dogs was a substitute to pizzas. So as the price of the substitute went up, the quantity demanded for pizzas went up. and there was a positive shift or a rightward movement of the demand curve, and we now have a new demand curve. Let's look at another case. Let's say people in the neighborhood, they always prefer to eat their pizzas with soda or with Coke. Now, if the price of Coke increased, we would say that the price of the entire meal of pizza plus Coke would increase, and people might start demanding less pizzas. So let us say the price of pizzas didn't change. The price of hot dogs didn't change. Everything else is constant. But the price of the complement product, Coke, went up. We observed that at $8, instead of 500 pizzas being demanded, there was now 400 pizzas demanded. At $10, instead of 300 pizzas, it was only 200 pizzas. Because the value of the meal had gone up. Coke was more expensive now. At $12 for pizzas, the quantity demanded was only 100. At $14, let's say the quantity demanded was 75. At $16, let's say it was only 25. So joining these dots together, we can see that the demand curve has moved to the left. So this is a negative shift in the demand curve. So let's put it here. The demand curve has moved to the left. And this was due to the price of complement going up. So because the price of complement went up, the quantity demanded for pizzas, they went down. So even though the price for pizzas didn't change, the quantity demanded went down. That was a leftward movement. So we now had a new demand curve for pizzas. Now think about it. Let's look at substitute again. Let's look at hot dogs. What would happen if the price of hot dogs go down? If the price of hot dogs go down, people would start moving from pizzas to hot dogs. And that would also result in a negative shift, a leftward movement of this demand curve. Quantity would go down. Again, what would happen if the price of Coke went down? Coke was cheaper. So the meal, pizza plus Coke, would now be cheaper, and the quantity demanded for pizzas would increase. And this would result in a positive shift, a rightward movement of the demand curve. So what we would say is positive shift or a rightward movement is there is more quantity demanded at each price point. A negative shift, a leftward movement of the demand curve, is less quantity demanded at each price point. Price of substitute goods has a direct relationship. That means if the price of substitute is going up, the quantity demanded would increase, positive shift. If the price of substitute goes down, hot dogs are cheaper, the quantity for pizzas would go down, negative shift, red pen here. If the price of Coca-Cola, a complement with pizzas, that went up, that resulted in a negative shift because the entire meal was more expensive. But if the price of Coke went down, then that would have resulted in a positive shift. The demand curve would have moved to the right. So a complementary product has an inverse relationship with the pizzas. So guys, that is about positive and negative shift, substitute products having a direct relationship, and complementary products having inverse relationship. Now let us look at a few other factors which could result in a shift of the demand curve. It could be a positive shift or a negative shift. Let us say the income levels of the people in the neighborhood that increased. Let's say the economy is doing good, they got more jobs, people are earning more. Now they can afford more pizzas, and the demand for pizzas, they've gone up. In other words, the price of the pizzas, that hasn't changed. But because people have more money to buy pizzas, there is a positive shift or a rightward shift in the demand curve for pizzas. So what we could say is income levels of the people in the neighborhood, that's gone up. And that is why the quantity of pizzas has also increased, positive shift. But if the income levels of the people in the neighborhood would have gone down, let's say they would have lost jobs, in that case, that would have been a negative shift in the demand curve for pizzas. Quantity for pizzas at each price level would have reduced. Another factor that we could look at is the size of the market. Let's say they have more people moved into the neighborhood. So the population of the neighborhood is now more than what it was earlier. So size of the market has gone up. Naturally, the quantity demanded would go up. This would result in a positive shift, a rightward shift in the demand curve. However, if people started moving out of the neighborhood, they went to other neighborhoods, size of the market reduced. In that case, the quantity at each price level would have reduced, resulting in a negative shift, a leftward movement of the demand curve. Let's talk about price expectations, and this one is interesting. Let us say there is an expectation that the prices of pizzas are going to increase tomorrow. In that case, we would have a lot of people rushing to the pizzeria to have the last slice of cheap pizza, or in other words, the quantity of pizzas today would go up because people know that pizzas are going to be more expensive tomorrow. However, if the price expectation is such that the prices of pizzas are going to go down tomorrow, then there might be a lot of people who might want to hold on to their hunger buds and wait a little more time to have cheaper pizzas. Now, I being an expert economist, I went out and I did a research on where people actually eat their pizzas. And I found that a lot of people in the low income group, they prefer to eat pizzas from those pizza wagons, pizza carts who went around serving tasty, delicious pizzas for just $5. And then I saw that there were a lot of people in the medium to high income group who ordered pizzas from pizzerias, from Pizza Hut, from Domino's, from Papa John's, tasty, delicious pizzas, but costing you $10. And then I also observed that there was a high income group who went around to premium, expensive restaurants and they paid anywhere between $30 and $50 for the pizzas. So that was expensive, but they had the money. And now let us assume that the income levels of this entire market went up. Everybody here started earning more than what they were earning earlier. The economy was doing good, there were good jobs, more dollars coming into their pockets. Naturally, you would have a few people here who are earning pretty good, ordering pizzas from pizzerias, now wanting to go into those premium restaurants, dining in with their girlfriends, spending $30 for the pizza. And we also had a bunch of people here who were in the lower income group. Now they're earning more. So now they no longer wanted pizzas from these pizza wagons and carts. They ordered pizzas from pizzerias. So look at what happened. We said that the income level has gone up. Now when I look at these premium restaurants, the demand for pizzas here went up. When I look at these pizzerias, you had some people moving out, starting to eat at premium restaurants, but a lot of people coming in because a lot of people who used to eat pizzas from this pizza wagons and carts now prefer pizzerias. So with the increase in income, we can say that the demand for pizzas from premium restaurants, that's gone up. So income has gone up, quantity has gone up. When you look at pizzerias, let's say this was the demand schedule, demand curve for pizzerias. With increase in income, the quantity demanded of pizzas from pizzerias, even that has gone up. But how about The demand from pizzas from these pizza wagons or carts. I told you that the income level has gone up, but we can see that the quantity here has actually gone down. So the quantity was so much, it's gone down now. So guys, this one, so what we would say is the pizza from this pizza wagons or carts is not a normal good. It's an inferior good. So as people start earning more, they want to go out of this, they want to walk out of this. So the general rule that we have for normal goods is as income levels increase, the quantity increases. The demand curve shifts to the right, as we saw in case of demand for pizzas from pizzerias, from premium restaurants. But for inferior goods, if the income level goes up, the quantity actually goes down. So even though the income level of the people went up, the demand of pizzas from pizza wagons or carts actually went down, or the demand curve for these pizzas moved to the left, negative shift. But for these inferior goods, if income levels go down, if people start losing jobs, economy is not doing so good, then you would see that the pizza wagon carts, they sell more pizzas, the quantity goes up. So guys, the normal goods, that's your general rule. Inferior goods, that's an exception, and that's pretty interesting. Now we are looking at the elasticity of demand. Basically, we're talking about the sensitivity of the demand of the consumers. How elastic, how flexible are they? So let's start with price elasticity of demand. So we are looking at elasticity of demand, and we start with the price elasticity of demand, where we are looking at for a percentage change in price. So for a percentage change in price, what happens to quantity? What's the percentage change in quantity? So we know that if price goes up, quantity is going to go down. But for a given percentage change in price, what's the change in quantity? If price goes down, quantity would go up. Again, for a given percentage change in price, what's the change in quantity? So let's say price has gone up by 10%. And for this 10% increase in price, we see a 15% dip in quantity demanded. So in this case, the price elasticity is going to be 1.5. That means the price elasticity is greater than 1. The product here is elastic. The demand for the product, it's elastic. That means consumers, they are price sensitive. They are flexible. They're going to move out if you try to fleece them with higher prices. Let's say if the price increases by 10%, but the quantity, it dips by only 5%. Now in this case, the price elasticity is 0.5. It's less than 1. That means the demand for this product is inelastic. That means the consumers, they are not price sensitive. They are not flexible. They'll stick to you no matter, even if you charge them higher. Now let's look at income elasticity of demand. We'll be looking at the effect of changes in consumer income on the quantity demanded of a product. So income elasticity is percentage change in quantity divided by the percentage change in income. This was price elasticity. So you get price here. Now we're looking at income elasticity. So you're looking at income here. Now we know that if income increases, so let's say if change in income is positive, the quantity demanded is going to go up. This is also going to be positive. So if you look at the signs, we would say if income elasticity is greater than 0, that means it's positive. That's a normal good. Let us say when there's a positive change in income, but the demand actually falls. In that case, we could say it's an inferior good. So when income elasticity is less than 0, we could say that's an inferior good. When we look at price elasticity of demand, we calculated what's the percentage change in quantity for a given change in price. So let us say we were looking at the percentage change in quantity for pizzas, and we looked at the percentage change in price again for pizzas. So it was the same product on the numerator and the denominator. Now we'll talk about cross price elasticity of demand, where we're going to look at the effect of the change in price of another product on the quantity demanded. So cross price elasticity of demand, so EXY equals percentage change in quantity of, let's say, product X divided by the percentage change in price of another product Y. So let us say we are looking at what's the percentage change in the quantity demanded of pizzas for a particular percentage change in price of hot dogs. So we know that if the percentage change in price of hot dogs is positive, that means the price of hot dogs go up. What's going to happen to pizzas? Naturally, people are going to stop eating hot dogs, eat more pizzas. The quantity demanded of pizzas is going to go up, it's going to be positive. So whenever the cross price elasticity EXY is greater than 0, we know we are talking about a substitute product, because in case of a substitute product, if the price of the substitute goes up, the quantity demanded goes up. So this is what we're looking at here. Then let's look at a complement. So let us say the price of Coke has gone up, product Y. What happens to the quantity demanded of pizzas? Because people prefer to eat Coke and pizzas together, and the price of Coke has gone up, the meal has gone up, that would reduce the quantity demanded of pizzas. So the quantity demanded is going to come down. We know that, right? If the price of complement goes up, the quantity demanded is going to go down. In other words, the cross price elasticity of demand for pizzas when we are looking at Coca-Cola is less than 0. So when the cross price elasticity is less than 0, that means we are looking at a complement. Now let's talk about what's going to happen to the demand for pizzas if the prices of these pens change. So let us say there is an increase in the price of pens. These pens, they become more expensive. What happens to the quantity demanded of pizzas? They are not related. That won't change. There will be a 0 change in quantity demanded of pizzas if prices of these pens change. That means the cross price elasticity is 0. And in this case, we know we are looking at unrelated products. So they are unrelated. Pens and pizzas, unrelated. So guys, once again, here we said we are looking at the quantity of pizzas versus the price of hot dogs. Here we are looking at the quantity of pizzas versus the price of Coke. So these were substitute products, complements. Here we are looking at the quantity of pizzas versus the price of these pens, unrelated product. The consumers purchase goods or consume goods because they get satisfaction out of the purchase or consumption. This satisfaction is called utility. And we also have a concept of marginal utility, which is the additional satisfaction derived from each additional unit of purchase or consumption. So So let's say we have a lot of consumers here demanding pizzas because they have satisfaction from eating those pizzas. And when we talk about marginal utility, that's the additional satisfaction that the consumer derives from eating an additional unit or additional slice of pizza. So let's say you're eating your first slice of pizza. You're very hungry and you love it. You have your second slice, it's still pretty good. Third slice, you like it. Fourth slice, it's good. Fifth slice, it's okay, but you're nearly full. By the time you have your sixth slice, you're not hungry anymore. And you have very limited marginal utility out of that sixth slice. So guys, as you consume more and more slices of pizza, your marginal utility decreased. This is the law of diminishing marginal utility. You know, it's so much like love at first sight. So the first time you looked at a girl, you have the highest marginal utility and you fall in love. The second time, she's still so beautiful, she's so hot. Third time, she's so good. And then you get married. You look at her again after marriage and you realize you've got negligible or even zero marginal utility. Guys, isn't this the law of diminishing marginal utility? I know you guys are all hungry, and that's why I've been talking about your utility from eating pizzas. Now let's say you have an option of taking pizzas as well as pasta. Now you would be happy with a lot of pizza and a little bit of pasta. You'd be equally happy, equally satisfied with enough pizza and enough pasta. And equally satisfied with a little bit of pizza and a lot of pasta. So if I try to plot this on the graph that I have here, I got pizza here, pasta here. So what I said is a lot of pizza and a little bit of pasta is as satisfying to you as enough pizza and enough pasta. And even that's as satisfying to you as a little bit of pizza and a lot of pasta. So along these 3 points that I've plotted, you are indifferent. All these 3 points provide you the same level of utility. And this curve that joins these points is called the indifference curve. Now let's say you're very hungry. You haven't eaten anything since last night. And you want more utility, more satisfaction. You could go for a lot of pizza and enough pasta. Now this point provides you more utility than this point here. Or let's say you could go for enough pizza and a lot of pasta. Naturally, this point provides more utility than this point here. But along these 2 points, you have the same level of satisfaction. Again, you're indifferent for both these points. So when we join these 2 points, we have another indifference curve. So we got 2 indifference curves that we've seen. This indifference curve with these 3 points, you're indifferent. You get an X level of utility. But the moment you have this indifference curve, this provides you high utility than the first curve. But across both these points, it's the same level of utility. Now let's say you haven't eaten anything in weeks and you're very, very hungry. You would want a lot of pizza and a lot of pasta. So this point here provides you more utility than this curve or this curve. So naturally, as you move ahead, as you move to the right, there is more utility. But along each curve, you got the same level of utility. Now I'll share a little secret with you. In college, I used indifference curves to decide which girl I wanted to have as my date on prom night. I used the y-axis for the levels of beauty. And I used the x-axis to decide how hot they were. So I started my analysis with 3 girls. The first one, she's very beautiful, but a little conservative, not too hot. The second one, she's good to look at. and hot enough. Third one, she's not beautiful, but very passionate, very romantic, and certainly very hot. I was attracted to all three of them, but I took a step back and looking at my chart, I said that all three provide the same level of utility, same level of satisfaction. And in this way, I ended up plotting all the girls in my batch, built a lot of indifference curves, till finally I could pinpoint on this one girl who was max on beauty and max on heat. And I knew this was the girl I wanted to go out with on prom night. Now, naturally, she had received a lot of proposals from a lot of guys. But the moment I showed her my analysis, my charting of indifference curves, where I had all the girls in college and she was the one who stood out, she knew I was the real dude with the real substance. So, thanks to economics in class and music at the discotheque, we danced happily ever after. If you want to spend money, you want to eat pizzas and pastas, you want to date beautiful and hot girls, you need to earn money. And now we're looking at your personal disposable income, which is your personal income less the personal taxes. So what do you do when your personal disposable income goes up? Basically, that's your marginal income. Do you consume or do you save? So we're looking at your marginal propensity to consume and your marginal propensity to save. So basically, what happens when there is a change in your disposable income? How much does this change result in a change of your consumption? And how much does it result in change of savings? So let's say your personal disposable income that went up by $100 and you ended up spending 70 out of those $100. The remaining 30 you saved. So your marginal propensity to consume is 70 by 100, 0.7. Your marginal propensity to save, that's 30 by 100 or 0.3. Now, marginal propensity to consume plus marginal propensity to save is always equal to 1. So 0.7 plus 0.3, that's 1. On a demand curve here, we looked at the quantity demanded by consumers, and we saw that as price increased, the quantity demanded reduced, because consumers, they wanted to have a lower price. At a lower price level, they demanded huge quantities, but as you increase the price, they said we need lesser quantity. So the demand curve, that was going downwards. So D for demand and D for down. Now let us look at the perspective of the suppliers of these goods. So the consumers, they want prices to be low. Suppliers, they want prices to be high. So for suppliers, as you increase the price, there is more incentive for them to supply more. So at lower prices, they want to supply less. They might want to produce other goods which are more profitable. But the moment you increase the price, they want to produce more of this good. They want to produce more of pizzas. That's an incentive, and they're happy supplying higher quantities. So on the demand curve, we looked at quantity demanded. On the supply curve here, we're looking at quantity supplied. So the law of supply here is, as you increase the price, the suppliers are happy increasing the quantity. Quantity supplied goes up. And this one is movement along the supply curve. So as the price went up, so let's say at $8, the suppliers, they were ready to supply only 100 pizzas. But the moment you increase the price to $10, they were happy supplying 300 pizzas. At $12, they supplied 400 pizzas. At $14, the quantity supplied was 450, and they were ready to supply 500 pizzas at $16 per pizza. We just saw the changes in the price would result in movement along the supply curve. If the prices went up, the quantity supplied, that's going to go up. If prices went down, the quantity supplied is going to come down. Now let's say the price, that's constant, but other variables change. Now they could result in a shift of the supply curve. So if the supply curve moves to the right, that's a positive shift. Which means that at each price, the suppliers are now ready to supply more quantity. So at $8 earlier, they were supplying 100 pizzas. Now they're ready to supply 200. At, let's say, $10 earlier, they were supplying 300 pizzas. Now they're happy supplying 400 pizzas. The supply curve has shifted to the right, a positive shift. Now, changes in variables other than price could also result in a negative shift. That means the supply curve shifts to the left. Now what happens is the suppliers are ready to supply lesser quantity at the same price. So let's say at $10, the suppliers were ready to supply 300 pizzas. If the supply curve shifts to the left, now they're ready to supply only 200 pizzas at the same price. That's a negative shift to the left. Now let's look at these factors which could result in a shift of the supply curve. So let's start with factors which have a direct relation with the supply curve. That means an increase in the factor would result in a positive shift. A decrease in the factor would result in a negative shift. So let's look at number of producers. So if the number of suppliers of pizza goes up, the quantity supplied at each price would tend to go up, and the supply curve would shift to the right, positive shift. But if the number of suppliers go down, there are only a few suppliers now, the quantity supplied at each price could go down, could result in a negative shift of the supply curve. Let's say the government has decided to subsidize pizzas. Basically, the government sees that everybody eats pizzas in like 5 minutes, gulp it up, get back to work. That's good for the economy. And they said, everybody in the country now eat pizzas. We're going to subsidize it. Think about the producer's perspective. Because of government subsidies, their cost of producing, supplying the pizzas has gone down. Which means that if government subsidies have gone up, they would now be ready to supply higher quantities at the same price, or positive shift of the supply curve. But let's say the government withdraws the subsidies, no longer government subsidies for pizzas. You eat anything you like. You can eat hot dogs, you can eat pasta. Now in that case, the cost of the supplies, that's going to go up. Or rather, it could result in a negative shift of the supply curve. At each price point, they would now be ready to supply lesser quantity. Let's talk about technological advances. So let's say you have a new robot made by Italian or Japanese companies, which is like this, and which has got its palms like this, fits down, goes up, pizza ready. Pizza ready. Pizza ready. Now this is a technological advancement, and this could result in huge cost savings, reduction of cost for the suppliers. And now they could be ready to supply higher quantity at the same price because their cost has gone down. So if there are technological advances that could result in a positive shift of the supply curve, because now they might be ready to supply higher quantity at the same price. So let's say at $10 earlier they were supplying only 300 pizzas. Now because of this advancement, they might be ready to supply 400 pizzas. A positive shift. But if there's no technological advances, technology has died out, might result in a negative shift. So these are factors which have a direct relationship with the supply curve. Let's look at a couple of other factors. Let's talk about production costs. So if the production cost of the suppliers go up, let's say labor becomes more expensive, the delivery guys now want more, capital becomes expensive, rents increase, production costs, they go up, the price of bread increases. Now in that case, they might be ready to supply a lesser quantity at the same price. So that's an inverse relationship. So as this factor has gone up, the quantity has gone down, negative shift of the supply curve. But if production costs go down, in that case, they might be ready to supply a higher quantity at the same price, a positive shift of the supply curve. Let's talk about prices of other goods. So let's say we got the pizza guys, they're also producing pasta, and the price of pasta that goes up. Now they want to now produce or supply pasta. They're not interested in pizzas anymore. So the quantity supplied for pizzas at each price point may be lower than what you had earlier. So because the prices of pasta increase, they are more interested in supplying pasta, not pizzas. But if prices of pasta, let's say, goes down, pasta is no longer lucrative, they all want to produce pizzas, quantity for pizzas goes up. So these are a couple of factors which have an inverse relationship, which means as the factors increase, results in a negative shift of the supply curve. But if the factors decrease, that results in a positive shift of the supply curve. Now you have another factor. Let's say we're looking at price expectations. So let's say we got manufacturers of pizzas and they think that the prices of pizzas would go up. Now because they think that there's a chance of prices, there's an expectation that prices are going to go up, they might want to increase their production right from right now. So that could result in an increase in quantity or a positive shift of the supply curve. But if the price expectation is such that the prices are supposed to be going down in the near future, that could reduce the quantity supplied at each price point, a negative shift of the supply curve. Now, price expectations, this could be a little tricky because we're looking at perishable commodities. They really want to, if price expectation is going up, they want to produce higher quantities because they want to increase the production. But if it's a non-perishable good, they might want to produce more but hoard it, not supply. So that could get a little complicated, but let's stick with this and let's look at all of these factors which can result in a positive shift or a negative shift of the supply curve on our book. We already looked at the elasticity of demand. Now let's talk about the elasticity of supply. Basically, how elastic, how flexible are the suppliers? Will they be able to reduce quantity if price falls, or will they increase quantity if prices go up? So we are looking at elasticity of supply, and we are looking at what's the percentage change in quantity supplied for a given percentage change in price. Let us say the quantity supplied increases by 15% for a 10% increase in price. Now that means that the elasticity of supply is greater than 1. The suppliers are elastic, they are flexible. Let us take another example where prices go up by 10%. but the supply increases only by 5%. That means the elasticity of supply is less than 1, and the suppliers, they are not flexible, they are inelastic. So that was the elasticity of supply. We've seen that consumers, they prefer lower prices, and their quantity demanded at each price is reflected by the demand curve. And we saw that producers, they prefer higher prices, and their quantity supplied at each price is reflected by the supply curve. Now the point at which the demand curve and the supply curve they meet, that's called the point of market equilibrium. So I have done the demand curve and the supply curve on this one chart. The point at which both these curves meet, this is the point of market equilibrium. So let's say in our example, the point at which the curves meet is $10. At this point, the quantity demanded of pizzas is 300 pizzas. The quantity supplied, that's also 300. So the point of market equilibrium is the point at which all the goods offered for sale will be sold. In other words, quantity demanded by consumers would be equal to quantity supplied by the suppliers. Now let's look at what happens to market equilibrium when the government interferes. So the government is interfering with the market. Let's say they come and they impose a price ceiling, and the problem is that price ceiling is below the equilibrium price. So let us say in this case the government, they impose a price ceiling on pizzas, and they say that you cannot sell pizzas above $8. Now look at what happens. So at $8, the quantity demanded is 500 pizzas, lot of demand. Quantity supplied is just 100 pizzas. So because of this price ceiling below the equilibrium price, there would be a shortage. The consumers, they want lots of pizzas. Suppliers, they don't want to supply a lot. Shortage of pizzas. Or let's say the government, they come in and they impose a price floor, and that price floor is above the equilibrium price. Let's say they say that you cannot sell pizzas below $12. That's the price floor. So look at what's going to happen now. The quantity demanded for pizzas at $12 is going to be 200 pizzas. But the supply is going to be for 400 pizzas. That means there's going to be excess supply at this price, or there are going to be unsold surpluses. So whenever the government comes in, they interfere with the market, they create trouble, as we can see out here. So we've seen that with price remaining constant, if there are changes in factors other than price, they could result in a shift of the demand curve. It could shift to the right, positive shift, or it could shift to the left, negative shift. Same thing for supply curve. Assuming price remains constant, changes in all these other factors could result in a positive shift or a negative shift of the supply curve. Now let's look at what happens to market equilibrium if there is a positive or a negative shift of the demand curve and or the supply curve. So let us say that there is an increase in demand, or the demand curve shifts to the right with no change in supply. So the demand curve, that's moving to the right. No change in the supply curve. So what happens to equilibrium? So if we compare the equilibrium price here to the price that we have here. The price that's gone up. Let's look at the equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium quantity that we have here, that's more than what we had earlier. Equilibrium quantity has also gone up. So guys, if there is an increase in demand or a positive shift of the demand curve with no change in supply, equilibrium price is going to go up. Equilibrium quantity, even that is going to go up. Now let's look at decrease in demand or a negative shift of the demand curve. So if the demand curve shifts to the left with no change in supply, what happens to equilibrium price? That comes down. What happens to equilibrium quantity? Even that reduces, comes down. Now let's look at movements in the supply curve. So let's say the demand curve remains constant, no change in demand. But there is an increase in supply or a positive right shift of the supply curve. What happens to equilibrium price? So this becomes your new equilibrium price. That comes down. What happens to equilibrium quantity? That goes up. Now let's look at what happens if there is a decrease in supply or a negative shift in the supply curve. No change in demand. So the equilibrium price, that's gone up. Equilibrium quantity, that's gone down now. So these are important. You could have questions such as these on your exams. My preferred approach is draw the demand curve and the supply curve. Draw your equilibrium and then look at what's the change they're asking you on your exams. So we got a few more examples out here. So let me rub it, clean it up a bit. That looks fair enough. So we're back to where we started, the demand curve and the supply curve, the original market equilibrium. So now what happens if both demand and supply increase? That means both the demand curve and the supply curve shift to the right, positive shift for both. So the demand curve is shifting to the right. The supply curve is also shifting to the right. Now in this case, the quantity, the equilibrium quantity has certainly gone up. Demand is up, supply is up. Naturally, there's going to be more quantity. But what happens to price? Can't be too sure. Depends on how much has the demand and the supply curve moved. So guys, in this case, you could say the equilibrium quantity would go up. But the equilibrium price, that's indeterminate. Now let's look at what's going to happen if both demand and supply reduce. Both the demand curve and the supply curve shift to the left, negative shift for both of them. So let me rub this off. The demand curve shifts to the left, negative. The supply curve also shifts to the left, negative. Now, in this case, what I'm sure is quantity is going to reduce. But I'm not sure what's going to happen to price, indeterminate. So, if both the demand and supply decrease, quantity would certainly decrease. Price, don't know. Could increase, could decrease, could remain the same. Now we got a few more examples. So what's going to happen if demand increases and supply decreases? So the demand curve, that increases, so that moves to the right, positive shift. Supply, that decreases, so the supply curve moves to the left. Now in this case, we are sure that the price is going to go up. Think about it, guys. Demand has increased, supply has gone down. The price is for sure going to increase. But in such cases, the quantity is indeterminate. So the quantity could increase. Now, if I have the curve like this, the quantity could remain the same. Or if I have a curve like this, the quantity could even reduce. So the quantity is indeterminate, but the price would increase. Now the last one, what's going to happen if demand decreases and supply increases? So demand decreases means the demand curve, that's going to move to the left. Supply increases, that means the supply curve, that's going to move to the right. Positive shift. Now in such cases, what we are sure is the price, the equilibrium price, that's going to fall. But what we are not sure is what's going to happen to equilibrium quantity. That's indeterminate. It could increase, decrease, remain the same. So guys, these could be a little tricky on your CPA exams. So let's get to the book, look at it once more. I'm sure you're going to be champions. You're going to be geniuses with demand, supply and market equilibrium. Let's now talk about costs of production of a firm in the short run. So we are looking at fixed costs of production as well as variable costs of production. Let's first talk about fixed costs, which are fixed. So the total fixed cost of the firm are fixed. But when we're looking at average fixed cost, so that is total fixed cost divided by the quantity produced. Since total fixed cost is constant, it's fixed, as quantity increases, average fixed cost decreases. That is why we have a downward sloping line for average fixed cost. Next, let's look at average variable cost, which is total variable costs by quantity. Now, ideally, average variable cost should have remained constant irrespective of the level of production. But what we observe is, as production initially increases, average variable cost per unit reduces because there is better, more efficient utilization of resources. But if production increases beyond a particular point, we see that there are inefficiencies creeping into the fixed size production facility, which causes average variable cost to actually rise. So guys, once again, after a particular point in production, we see that with increase in quantity, average variable cost increases. Then you got average total cost, which is average fixed cost plus average variable cost. And a very important concept that I want to give out here is marginal cost. Now, marginal cost is the increase in cost that will result from producing one extra unit. Now, since the increase in production will not change our fixed cost, only variable costs are relevant to these marginal costs. So, we've seen that after a particular point, increase in production would result in increase in average variable costs, and hence even marginal cost would increase from that point onwards. Once again, marginal cost is the increase in cost resulting from producing one extra unit. Since beyond a particular time in production, we would see inefficiencies coming in, average variable cost going up, even marginal cost goes up. Now the demand curve slopes downward. So if you want to increase quantity, you got to reduce the price. And it's important for you to calculate marginal revenue. So that's the additional revenue, the marginal revenue received from the sale of one additional unit. So guys, we should produce and sell goods as long as our marginal cost is equal to or less than marginal revenue. So we could look at this point when marginal cost equals to marginal revenue. So before this point, we have marginal cost less than marginal revenue. But beyond this point, we have marginal cost more than marginal revenue. So we want to produce at this point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. So if we produce at this point, we can say if this is our average total cost, this is going to be the cost of production, and this is the demand curve, so this is going to be a sales revenue. So we're going to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and at that point this is going to be a sales, this is going to be a cost, this one is your profit. So guys, remember, you want to produce till the point marginal cost is less than or equal to marginal revenue. In the short run, the firm had variable costs as well as fixed costs. But in the long run, all the costs of the firm are variable, as the firm can even change its so-called fixed cost because it's got a lot of time. It's the long run now. And now here we're looking at returns to scale. So the question is, what's the percentage increase in output for a percentage increase in inputs? So percentage increase in output for a percentage increase in inputs. Now, if the returns to scale is greater than 1, that means the firm is enjoying economies of scale, which means increased efficiency resulting from the firm producing more number of units. So that's better utilization of resources. So let us say, if we look at this as the firm's long run average cost, up to this point, the firm seems to be enjoying economies of scale, or the returns to scale is greater than 1. But what we see is beyond this point, the returns to scale is less than 1, or the percentage increase in output is less than percentage increase in input. So beyond this point, the firm has returns to scale of less than firm, or the firm is into diseconomies of scale. So economies of scale, as I told you, means increased efficiency as the firm is producing more units. Diseconomies of scale means increased inefficiency as the firm is increasing its production. So economies of scale result from better utilization of resources. Diseconomies of scale result from, let's say, management facing a lot of difficulty in controlling the activities of larger number of employees, larger facilities, lots of production, diseconomies. Now, a firm may decide to produce here, here, or here, depending on what is its marginal revenue. So a firm would continue producing as long as its marginal revenue is equal to or greater than its marginal cost. But what we can see here is, at this point, the firm would have the lowest average cost of production in the long run.